as you know, introduced legislation last night to update and replace the 2001 and 2002 AUMFs a week in advance of when we planned to have a markup. Senator Menendez and I talked at the last hearing about the best way to make sure members were up to date. I do want to point out that just this Congress, we had a hearing on June the 20th that about authorizations for the use of military force with Bellinger and Hicks. On August the 2nd, we had a closed hearing with Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Mattis on the same topic, August 2nd. On October 30th, we had the authorizations for the use of military force administration's perspective, by Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Mattis. And then on December the 13th, we had another hearing with Stephen Hadley, Christine Wormuth, and John Bellinger. It was those hearings that then developed the principles that I then gave to Senator Cardin, okay, at that time, okay, and that's what we've been working off to create an AUMF. So those hearings created the body of work that we now have. In addition, since I've been the lead Republican, we had a hearing in 2015 with Secretary Kerry, Secretary Carter, and General Dempsey. We had one in December 2014 with Secretary Kerry, and we had one again May 21st, 2014 with Stephen Preston and Mary McLeod. So when we did the bipartisan Syria AUMF, we had a working meeting where we all sat down and went through it, and people were able to talk openly about it. That's what we propose to do here on Wednesday, to have an all-members meeting, staff meeting, sit in a room and walk through it just like we did last time we did a bipartisan AUMF, which would give people time to write amendments before amendment deadline. So to me, having another hearing felt like, to me, I know it isn't, I've talked to Senator Menendez since, felt like a stall tactic when really we've hearing to this thing to death. The hearings are what developed the principles that caused us to come to this bipartisan agreement. So I hear you, but I can't imagine. We've got a week. The text is out. I'm glad to spend however many hours people want to spend on Wednesday walking through in a closed session. So I guess I'm not understanding. When we did the Syria, when we wrote it that day and passed it. Let me say one more time. We wrote it that day and passed it. So I guess I'm confused as to why this feels to be rushed.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Okay, of course.
Mr. Chairman, you know, we have a history of working collaboratively with you, but an AUMF is the single most significant vote. An authorization for the use of military force is the single most significant vote a member of Congress can take, because it is about sending and committing our sons and daughters into war and actions and risking their lives. So it's a very momentous occasion. Now, I appreciate the chairman's recital of hearings that have been had in concept about what an AUMF should look like. But the reality is we have had hearings specifics on a specified AUMF to be marked up before we actually voted on it. I think we got the final version last night, and it seems to me that the full implications and details of the text should be publicly vetted before a vote, that the Congress is not creating unintended consequences or ways the AUMF could be misused in the future, as some of us believe the ones in 2001 and 2002 have been used. I think the administration should be heard on it. It must take responsibility for executing war and sharing their views on the text. And right now we don't have their views at all. We did when we voted on those other ones. And I think the American people deserve the opportunity to hear the full arguments about the implications of the text, since it involves sending their sons and daughters into war for possibly many years to come. Now, I think that our request for a hearing is not stalling. As I have said to you privately, and I'll say here publicly, I have no problem getting to a markup on an AUMF. I have cast votes for AUMFs. So I'm not fearful of having a determination. When I think the AUMF is a correct one, I will cast for it. And when I think it's improper or not properly drafted, I will vote against it. But I think this is the singular most important thing we can do, and I don't think it's an inordinate amount of time to get some thoughts both from the administration as well as from non-administration witnesses. All can be done at one hearing in one day, and then members could think about the testimony they've heard on the specific AUMF that is being voted on, and have an opportunity to prepare their amendments should they believe there should be some. I mean, I compliment you and Senator Kaine on trying to come to a draft that seeks to move the issue forward. But I think this is a momentous vote, and I think it needs the appropriate attention. So it's not about stalling, let's get that straight. It's about a thoughtful consideration of what this specific AUMF says, what it means, looking at all the implications of it, coming to an understanding of it, and then thoughtfully being able to draft amendments and cast a final vote. And that's, I think I expressed the concern of many of my members on my side who feel that way, and so that's why I wrote you the letter that I did.
Well, let me see if I can get an administration official up here on Wednesday, and we'll see what we can do. And I think we might actually be better off having them maybe even down in the SCIF, which is what we did on Syria piece, where I don't care where we do it, but and then obviously when we have a markup, the public will be watching and everyone can understand the implications. But let me see what I can do about potentially having someone from the administration here on Wednesday to walk through.
If I would urge you to be very good to have an administration witness, and from my perspective, I believe most of it can be done in public. We're not talking about actions specific. And secondly, I would urge you to consider some analysis outside of the administration of the specific text. All could be done at the same time, and I think that would be a good way to move forward.
Duly noted, and we will see where it goes. We'll keep talking. Again, I want to say one more time, I doubt there's ever been as many hearings in advance to develop principles to bring people together around an AUMF in advance. This is actually, there's been so much preparatory work done on this. I think people understand the implications, and we've talked about all of these things publicly, but I hear you, and I understand you have members of your caucus that are pushing for that to occur, and I realize that. So I thank you for the way you work with us. Most of the time.
We feel the same way about you, Mr. Chairman, most of the time.
I know you do. I know you do. I know you do. So with love, we thank Acting Assistant Secretary Satterfield, Assistant Secretary Karam, and Mr. Jenkins for joining us here today. This hearing will examine U.S. policy towards Yemen, particularly in light of the growing concern within Congress regarding the civil war and its dire humanitarian consequences. According to the United Nations, more than 22 million people, roughly 3/4 of the population, need humanitarian aid and protection, and 18 million people are food insecure. Last year, there were over 1 million suspected cases of cholera. While Yemen has always faced significant socioeconomic challenges, the civil war, which began with the Houthis' armed takeover of much of the country in 2014 and their overthrow of Yemen's legitimate government in January 2015, has plunged the country into a humanitarian crisis. Iran's support of the Houthi rebels and the intervention of Saudi-led forces to restore Yemen's deposed government, which began in March of 2015, have been particularly devastating. In over 3 years of conflict, thousands of civilians have been killed. Errant airstrikes have hit schools, weddings, and hospitals. Humanitarian groups cannot reliably provide aid due to movement constraints, and uncertain port access has slowed commercial imports of food and fuel. Of course, Saudi Arabia is a longtime U.S. partner, but partners must be candid with each other. So I have raised my concerns regarding, as many people here have, Saudi Arabia's conduct in Yemen with senior Saudi officials, including the Crown Prince, on multiple occasions in this last year. I know that many of my colleagues have done the same things as I've mentioned, and I urge them to continue doing so, as I will. But at the same time, Saudi Arabia has a right to defend itself from war spilling across its border. For nearly 2 years, the Houthis have fired Iranian-manufactured ballistic missiles into Saudi territory. In recent months, they've aimed these missiles at Riyadh. At least hundreds of Saudis have been killed in the fighting, and millions live under constant threat of attack. So resolving the conflict in Yemen means helping Saudi Arabia address its legitimate security concerns to prevent entrenchment of an Iranian armed group on its southern border. As the committee considers ways to support effective U.S. policy on Yemen, I look forward to hearing our witnesses provide details on what the U.S. is doing diplomatically to encourage resolution of the conflict. I also hope our witnesses will explain the nature of U.S. support to the Saudi-led coalition, including relevant authorities, and what can be done to address the humanitarian situation.